What if everything you thought about human creativity was actually a lie? What if the thing that makes us feel most alive, most uniquely human, is already being replicated by a machine that learned everything it knows in about 3 weeks? Right now, an AI can write a best-selling novel, compose a symphony, design a building, and paint a portrait that sells for $500,000 at auction. And the terrifying part is that most people cannot tell the difference. So today, we are not just asking whether AI can be creative. We are asking something far more dangerous. We are asking whether human creativity still matters. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is going to completely change the way you think about art, intelligence, and what it actually means to be human in a world that is accelerating faster than anything we have ever seen before. If this kind of deep thinking about artificial intelligence is the stuff you want more of, hit that like button right now and subscribe to AI Unlocked Official. We break down the biggest questions about AI so you can actually understand what is happening in the world around you. Alright, let us get into this. Let us start with something that actually happened. In 2018, a painting called Portrait of Edmund de Bellamy was sold at Christie's auction house in New York for $432,500. The buyer expected to pay around $10,000. Nobody expected what happened. The painting was not made by a human artist. It was generated entirely by an algorithm, a generative adversarial network trained on 15,000 portraits spanning 6 centuries of European art history. The AI had never seen a sunset, never felt longing or grief, never experienced the weight of a brush in its hand. And yet it created something that moved people, something that made them reach into their pockets and spend nearly $500,000. That moment did not just shock the art world. It cracked something open in the way humans think about themselves. Because for centuries, creativity was the one thing we believed was ours alone. War, disease, poverty, we have faced all of it. But through every dark chapter of history, art survived because humans made it. We told stories around fires. We carved figures into cave walls. We composed music while empires crumbled. Creativity was never just a skill. It was proof of something deeper, something spiritual, something that separated us from every other creature on Earth. And now, for the first time in history, that line is blurring in ways nobody fully prepared for. Here is where it gets really interesting, though, because if you want to understand this battle between AI and human creativity, you first have to understand what creativity actually is, and that turns out to be a lot more complicated than most people expect. Most people assume creativity means making something new. But psychologists and neuroscientists who have spent decades studying this would tell you something different. Creativity is not just novelty. It is novelty combined with value. It is the ability to make a connection that surprises even the person making it. It is the ability to reach into your own emotional history, your fears, your joys, your specific and unrepeatable personal experience, and pull out something that resonates with another human being who has never met you. Think about the last song that made you cry. Think about the last book that felt like it was written specifically for your life. Think about the last painting that made you stop in a gallery and just stand there. What hit you in those moments was not just technical skill, it was recognition. It was the feeling that another human had been inside an emotion you thought only you had ever felt, and they found a way to make it visible. That is what creativity has always been. Not just production, connection. So the real question is not whether AI can produce. It clearly can. The question is whether it can connect. And that is where this story gets complicated, because the answer depends entirely on what you mean by connection. Here is a fact that might surprise you. The average AI language model, like the ones powering creative tools today, has processed more text than any single human could read in 1,000 lifetimes. It has read every novel ever digitized, every poem, every screenplay, every scientific paper, every forum argument, every love letter left on the internet. It has identified patterns in human language and emotion at a scale no individual human brain could ever achieve. And because of that, it can produce content that feels emotionally resonant, that seems personal, that mirrors the texture of human experience back at you in a way that feels almost uncomfortably real. But here is the thing: mirroring is not the same as feeling. Processing is not the same as experiencing. When a human artist writes about grief, they are drawing from something that actually happened inside them, something that rewired their nervous system, something they carry in their body every single day. When an AI writes about grief, it is producing a statistically likely sequence of words that tend to follow from other words associated with sadness, loss, and longing. It is a reflection without a mirror, a map without a territory. Now, some people hear that and they say, so what? If the output moves you, does the process matter? If the painting makes you feel something, does it matter that no human hand held the brush? And honestly, that is one of the most fascinating philosophical debates happening right now, and it does not have a clean answer. But before you land on one side or the other, there is something else you need to know. Because the story gets even more complicated when we look at what AI is actually doing to human creativity and practice. And this part is something most people are not talking about nearly enough. Right now, musicians are using AI to generate entire albums in hours. Game studios are using AI to create thousands of unique characters, environments, and storylines. Advertising agencies are using AI to produce campaign visuals that used to take weeks of work by a full team of designers. On one hand, this is incredible. It is democratizing creativity in a way that has never been possible before. A teenager in a small town with no formal training can now produce music, art, and stories that match the technical output of professionals. The barrier to entry for creative work has essentially collapsed. But there is a shadow side to this, and it is growing. As AI-generated content floods every platform on the internet, the economics of creative work are being completely restructured. Illustrators are losing commissions. Writers are seeing their freelance rates collapse. Voice actors are watching their voices get cloned and sold. Stock photographers are watching their entire industry evaporate. The same technology that is empowering some people is quietly dismantling the livelihoods of others. And the people most affected are rarely the ones making headlines. There is something worth sitting with there, because it forces us to ask not just what AI can do, but what kind of world we are building as we let it do more and more of it. Let us zoom out for a second, because the history of this kind of disruption is actually really instructive. When photography was invented in the 1800s, portrait painters panicked. They genuinely believed their profession was finished. And in some ways, they were right. The demand for painted portraits dropped dramatically. But something unexpected happened. Painting did not die, it evolved. Freed from the obligation to document reality, painters began experimenting with abstraction, with emotion, with the inner life of perception itself. Impressionism, Cubism, Expressionism, Surrealism, almost every major art movement of the modern era was, in some sense, a response to photography. The camera did not kill painting, it liberated it. And there are people today who believe the same thing will happen with AI. That by offloading the purely technical and imitative aspects of creative work to machines, human artists will be freed to go deeper, to take bigger risks, to explore the edges of experience that AI literally cannot reach because it has never lived them. That is a genuinely hopeful idea, and there is real evidence to support it. Some of the most interesting creative work being produced right now uses AI as a collaborator rather than a replacement. Artists who use AI to generate unexpected combinations of imagery that then inspire entirely new directions they would never have discovered on their own. Writers who use AI to rapidly prototype story structures, then discard the AI output and write the emotional core themselves. Musicians who use AI-generated textures and soundscapes as raw material for compositions that are deeply personal and utterly original. The tool does not determine the art. The human using the tool does. But here is the part nobody wants to talk about. Not every creative person is going to thrive in that kind of adaptive model. Not everyone has the resources, the training, or the inclination to rethink their entire approach to their craft on a timeline set by a technology company in Silicon Valley. And the gap between those who can adapt and those who cannot is not just a professional gap. It is often a socioeconomic one, it is an age one, it is a language one, it is a difference in access to the tools and education needed to stay relevant in a world that is changing faster than formal institutions can track. So when we talk about AI versus human creativity, we cannot just talk about it as an abstract philosophical debate. We have to talk about it as a social reality that is already reshaping who gets to make a living doing creative work and who does not. Now, let us look at something that most people in this conversation miss entirely. Because when we compare AI creativity to human creativity, we usually focus on the output. But there is something about the process of human creativity that is deeply, stubbornly irreplaceable, not because machines cannot replicate the product, but because the process itself is part of the point. Think about what happens when a human being makes something. A novelist who spends 3 years writing a book is not just producing words. They are living with characters, wrestling with ideas, discovering things about themselves they did not know before they started. A painter who returns to the same canvas for months is not just applying pigment. They are in a conversation with their own vision of the world, constantly revising and questioning and seeing differently. A songwriter who writes at 3 in the morning after a relationship ends is not just creating content. They are processing something real, turning pain into form, finding meaning in the act of making itself. That process has value that exists entirely outside the product. It has value for the person doing it. And no matter how sophisticated AI becomes, a machine that generates a painting in 8 seconds is not having that experience. It is not being transformed by what it makes. It is not discovering anything about itself. It is executing a function, a remarkable, sometimes breathtaking function, but a function nonetheless. And here is what that means for you, as someone living through this moment. Even if AI eventually produces creative outputs that are indistinguishable from human work, even if critics and audiences cannot tell the difference, there will still be profound value in the human act of creation, not because of what gets made, but because of what making does to the person doing it. The courage it requires to share something vulnerable, the growth that happens through repeated failure and revision. The connection formed between artist and audience when both know that a real person made something and chose to put it into the world. That is not nostalgia. That is something fundamental about how humans build meaning, and it is not going away. But let us be honest about something. AI is getting better at a rate that makes even the people building it uncomfortable. The models of 3 years ago feel prehistoric compared to what exists today. And the models of today will feel prehistoric in another 3 years. At some point, the question of whether AI creativity is real creativity may become less important than the question of how we choose to live with the answer. Because here is what the most thoughtful researchers and artists and philosophers in this space are starting to say. The rise of AI creativity is not the end of human creativity. It is a test of what we actually believe creativity is for. If we believed creativity was just about producing impressive outputs, then AI wins and the debate is over. But if we believe creativity is about the full human experience of making, of struggling, of growing, of connecting, of meaning-making in a world that often resists it, then AI is not a replacement. It is a mirror, reflecting back at us the question of what we actually value and why. And the answer to that question is going to shape everything. The policies we write, the platforms we build, the schools we design, the economies we construct, the kind of future we choose to live in, not sometime in the distant future, right now. In decisions being made today by companies and governments and individuals who may not even realize the full weight of what they are deciding. You are living through one of the most significant turning points in the history of human creativity. What comes next depends partly on technology, but mostly it depends on us. So here is what I want to leave you with. The next time you encounter something creative, whether it is a song or a painting or a story or even a piece of writing that moves you, ask yourself what you are really responding to. Are you responding to the technical execution? Or are you responding to the evidence of a human life being lived, a human mind reaching toward you across the gap between one experience and another? Because that reaching, that willingness to be seen, that courageous act of putting something real into the world, that is something no algorithm has ever done, and no algorithm ever will. Before you go, I want to ask you something directly. Do you think AI will ever truly replace human creativity, or is there something about the human experience of making that can never be replicated? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you think, and the conversation down there is always where the best ideas surface. If this video made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The more people understand what is actually happening at the intersection of AI and human creativity, the better the conversations we can have about where this is all going. This has been AI Unlocked Official. Keep asking the hard questions, keep making things, and we will see you in the next one.